Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Wednesday, March 6th, and today's webinar is going to be Tribal Housing Education, Engaging Future and Existing Clients. Your instructor today is Marie Bonville. I will be your webinar facilitator today. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center. A quick disclaimer before we begin. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Before I get started, I just want to familiarize you with the oh my goodness. I'm going to show you how you can use the Adobe platform today. If you look at the very top, you're going to see a hand tool, and with that hand tool, you can either raise hand, agree, disagree, applaud, laugh, or step away. Now your screen should look similar to the graphic here. At the very bottom of your screen, you will have a box that says Files. Here you will find any handouts or appendix items included in today's presentation. Please feel free to download a copy for yourself. Simply click the item you would like to download, then click the arrow pointing downwards to download and save onto your device. Once the item is downloaded, it should appear in your device's download section. The second box labeled Web Links is where you will find our survey about today's webinar, along with the links to join our email list and any other links that will be seen throughout today's presentation. Finally, to the right of the screen, we have a chat box available. This is how you will communicate with the instructor and NLC staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to interact by using the chat box. Simply type your message and hit enter or click that up arrow icon button to submit. We do encourage class participation, so please feel free to write in those questions or comments. Tech support issues should also be submitted here. Know that most can be solved by exiting and re-entering the meeting room. Let's all try out the chat box together now by typing in your name, where you're joining us from, and your tribal affiliation. Oh, and today's webinar is being recorded. And I would now like to introduce your webinar instructor, Marie Bonville.
Thank you, Awista. Thank you to the Native Learning Center for having me back. And hi, everyone in the attendee box there. As Awista said, go ahead and put your name, where you're from, the organization you work with, any information you think might be helpful for us to kind of tailor our discussion tonight, or today, I should say. I've got so many different trainings in different time zones and different parts of the day that I can also forget. So a little bit about myself. I started my career with the Seminole Tribe of Florida back in, I won't say when, but a long time ago. And I worked in their education departments in different capacities. But I ended with the Native Learning Center, which was a blessing in that I was able to really expose myself to homeownership and my passion, which is providing folks with the information necessary to do their jobs well. It's a service-minded industry, in which case we're working to get folks housed, and it's a housing first model in the mindset and in the minds of the people that work in tribal housing specifically to support their tribal members and their communities through homeownership or through just immediate services. So it's really just been a blessing to be a part of that process in so many different ways. I am certified to provide Pathways Home and other homeownership and financial education trainings throughout Native communities. I have a bachelor's in political science and a minor's in international relations. In the past life, I must have really liked working in the public. So I went back and got a master's in public admin and really community development, which has kind of been my passion once leaving the NLC there, where I learn about how we all bring this together, because housing itself can lend to just amazing economic opportunities for our communities. And so bridging those gaps and finding out where employment and housing reside is kind of where I'm at now. And so that's a little bit about me. Today, we're talking about all things housing as it relates to the counseling itself. I know there's a lot of talk about becoming a HUD housing counseling certified. And so, yes, hi, Deborah. It's nice to see you in the chat there. But yeah, HUD housing counseling is going to become a very important part of the tribal housing experience. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what might be on the horizon there on that front. Hi, Kathy. See you as well. Deborah and everyone else, thank you for putting your information in the chat there. But yeah, today's conversation is going to talk about how do we create meaningful interactions, both one-on-one in our counseling sessions, but then also maybe in the group setting as well, because we know that resources being what they are, we might have to do more, large group education instead of these one-on-ones, depending on what your staff capacity looks like. The other thing is building the capacity of your staff to feel confident in providing these sorts of trainings. So we'll talk about that as well. Today's objectives, certainly staff capacity building, as I said, and housing, counseling, and education. That's the core of what I want you all to take away from today. The content that needs development. So many of us are using the same trainings, but they also require some tailoring, right, to fit the needs of your community in order to enhance engagement. You really can't have your clients engage with, the stock books that are provided to us. And then also a Q&A with you all in the room, because you are experts in what you do. And it's really helpful for us as a professional industry to talk to each other about what we're doing, what's working well, what you could be maybe working with another organization on, right? So maybe there's someone nearby who's providing the same services, and what they're doing that's working well for them, and how it might assist you. Sometimes it really isn't about reinventing the wheel so much as it is getting out of our silos and seeing what other folks are doing and seeing where we can partner, right? And also cost saving, right? Let's share some of those resources, and so that way we don't have to spend as much. The thing about housing counseling is that it does take program planning and development. You need to have stakeholder buy-in. Typically, that's going to be your executive directorship and your board, right? They're going to have to be, on board with the sorts of trainings you want to do in the future, and build that staff capacity. As I said, some of that is going to require additional resources, or finding those resources and applying for those grants for additional education, additional dollars. But I noticed that in my conversations with folks, that we really have taken off by way of homeownership, and that seems to be where the curriculum is based. And so our rental folks, are there any education materials for them specific to Native communities? Are there any, there's financial wellness, but not necessarily rental education. So I thought that an interesting place that we could maybe look into today, and see if there's some trainings that we might want to provide, or counseling that we might want to provide them as well. I think that is the foundation of homeownership, that they be ready for those rental goals, which can include some savings for them as renters as well. Of course, foreclosure prevention. Are we checking back in with those individuals who have received the gift of homeownership, right? We say it's a gift, we're excited for them, they get their housewarming gift, and then we never see them again, right? So we want to follow back up, because there are, perfect example, 2021, 2022, we had the lowest interest rate in the country, in the history of interest rates, right? It went down to, high twos, low threes, something like that. So the question is, were there individuals that should have refinanced and didn't? If the answer is yes, maybe you're one of those in one of those boats where you just didn't know to do it, right? It wasn't something we thought of at the time. Then foreclosure, maybe that's not the right term for it, right? Maybe it's homeownership resiliency, right? It's saying, here's how and where you can use your asset to benefit you, right? Via lowering your interest rate through refinance. It doesn't mean you're taking money out of your home. It may just mean getting better rates, right? That's just one example of how we can check back in with our homeowners and let them know what's going on with the market, in that it might be a good time to refinance. FYI, it's no longer a good time to refinance, but just those sorts of things. Same is true of pre-foreclosure, right? If they get in a financial situation that won't allow for them to make their payments, what should they do for second and third? Just making sure that it's an ongoing conversation with our existing homeowners. And then, of course, you want to evaluate your training outcomes through some training tools, right? So in the beginning, I think a housing needs assessment is a great way of kind of getting that information needed to get stakeholder buy-in. But then at the end, collecting information on your trainings, how they went, what does that look like for your organization is something to think about. And so this is kind of our planning session to say, what can we do in our communities? Now everyone's moving to sort of an online counseling model to be able to provide additional or expanded access. Of course, there's always been telephone counseling, group education, as I mentioned before, and our tried and true one-on-one individual counseling that takes place. But building support takes time and energy, and also confirmation that the need is there, right? So the types of questions that you want to make sure you're asking is, what counseling services that you're not providing right now? Everyone kind of knows what you're providing, but what are you not providing? Is it at rental education? Is it homeownership? Some folks don't have homeownership opportunities available in their communities. And or they have folks that maybe they're in an urban setting, right? And so what does this look like for you and your organization as far as the housing services you're providing, housing counseling services you want to provide? What is the demand for these services? Any foreclosure rates you can compare? How about the size and the age of the renters and the homeowners in terms of the size and age of the condition of the home, size of the area in which you have to develop? Things like that are all important. But then what beliefs, behaviors, or language barriers exist in terms of the culture surrounding homeownership or rental, right? For a lot of folks, there's this missed opportunity in saying that renters are all low income or low income or moderately low income, and then homeowners, those are the ones that can afford a home. And it's like, okay, well, that's not the way we want to describe homeownership. That's not the way we want to advise that folks think about homeownership. A lot of times people who are going for homeownership don't want to tell anybody, right? There's like the secret, thing that they want to do. And they don't want to let anyone know because they don't want anybody to feel to cast negative thoughts their way, right? And so there has to be kind of a conversation on what's the current temperature on rental renters, what is the current temperature on homeownership folks, and then do they all go to the same training? I notice for myself, sometimes I can see where individuals shut down in the middle of a training simply because we start talking about spending and saving habits, or we start talking about credit. And all of a sudden, they're not in the place or space to hear about homeownership anymore. So it's important to kind of figure out what types of trainings would be best for your community based on the individuals. Maybe a one-on-one counseling session is required, and then they can explore the group education option. And then, of course, your area median incomes, obviously, you're going to need that in response to, certain programs and services you provide. But what's the average median home value in your community? What does that look like? These are the types of questions that folks may not have. Even though they're providing some sort of homeownership opportunity, they haven't really put that out there for folks in their community to know more about. So this is about outreach and letting folks know your impact and what you've been working on in your communities as well. Housing partner referrals. Before I get too far into some of the requirements, I just want to say that if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about the HUD housing counseling status or situation right now, I just want to take a step back. So for those of you who aren't aware, back in the 60s and 70s, right when housing block grants in general throughout the country were being created, it was a requirement that if you were going to receive those funds to support housing in your communities, this is with exception to the tribes, they were required to create some sort of HUD, what we now call HUD housing counseling services or certifications. They had to go through a process to get certified as an agency to provide those sorts of services. The idea being, real estate agents are great, lenders are great, but they are being paid for their service. They are within the industry, and we want our folks to not have that uh, advantage, that referral advantage, to say, use our people versus others, right? The ethical aspect to it. We want these independent agencies to just provide the information necessary for the consumer to make an appropriate decision. So that's kind of where HUD housing counseling certification began. But this was an exception to the tribes. So none of those funding opportunities, the money that goes along with practicing housing counseling, it is an eligible activity for reimbursement. And so this is kind of where that comes from. So in 2010, with after the Dodd-Frank Act was put in place, the thought was, okay, this should actually include tribal communities. We want to tighten up the housing effort and make sure that HUD housing counseling services are provided. And again, going back to the time frame, think about 2008 and the housing crisis there, the lack of education. Obviously, folks didn't understand what an ARM was or some of these other financial instruments that were being used at the time. And so the thought was, let's put more money into housing counseling. Of course, down payment assistance programs will also require that you go to a housing counseling certified professional, right? So that's where all of those sorts of things you hear about come from. Well, in 2023, HUD hosted several consultations with tribal communities to discuss HUD housing counseling certification and what that would look like in tribal communities. I attended some of those sessions whereby which tribes, basically said, we not only have we been doing it, but we've been doing it for a really long time. We have Native-centric curriculum that's been approved by several different sources. And so, when you're looking at NAIHC, for example's Pathways Home, OESTA's body of trainings, building Native communities. There's one for youth. I mean, this is not something new to us. The Native CDFI world has been providing, training and capacity building for our staff as well. So, wrap around, we've been providing HUD housing counseling services, but the idea is we can tap into those funding resources as well, right? So because it's an eligible activity that can be reimbursed, that there may be a benefit and there may be drawbacks to this, right? So tribes are still providing their opinions about this, because on the flip side, this is about self-determination and the sovereignty, and how NAHASDA currently supports your efforts to be in charge for your programs as you see fit. So that conversation is still ongoing. So what I did was I said, okay, well, how can I take and talk about some of the things that are required of a HUD housing counseling certified organization, and just make sure we as professionals are doing just that. So in regards to, so kind of circle back to this slide here on housing partners, this is just to say that we do provide, access to the partners in housing, whether that's your lenders that are Section 184 lenders, your folks that may be close to working with insurance in your areas, in your state. Obviously, you might have several different lenders or CDFIs. USDA is another partner. Just wanting to make sure. And then also, too, maybe there are folks that could go conventional. So I'm wanting to make sure that you have a good balance, and that you're not steering any one person to any one lender simply because of just making sure you give them options. That they like to say you have at least 3 options per referral partner. But they also got to know your community, right? And know what's culturally appropriate, also to what love language your clients prefer in terms of communication, right? So are they texters? Are they the type that want to communicate formally through your organization, and there's no sort of communication that's done outside of your housing authority? So it just kind of depends. tribal rental counseling and education. So this is one that I'm interested. How many of you have currently a rental education program? Is it separate from your homeownership education, and what is currently provided, right? Those are if you don't have one, those are kind of the questions I would ask, is how how would it look on your reservation to provide, or your community to provide that information? When folks got financial assistance during the pandemic or post-pandemic, did it come with any education requirements, right? And I know the argument is, well, if they're in need of utility assistance or rental assistance, then we don't want them to be hindered by some sort of education requirement. But I'm just wondering if it was a thought to maybe provide it to them. And we'll just put that in the chat there and see what comes up. Be interesting to find out. But what would it look like in your community? Those are the sorts of questions to ask. And the same is true of homeownership counseling, right? Sometimes it starts with DBA, right? There's monies that are available and we want to provide down payment assistance, but what does it look like? Would there be enough money for pre and post purchase training? So having that conversation with your stakeholders is important as well, and kind of brainstorming that with the group, which is why I leave these slides for you to take them apart and do with it whatever you would need to ask those questions of your community and your stakeholders. But here's what we know about tenant and homeownership education goals. One, it increases, if you do have these programs, it increases rental and financial wellness. It improves the tenant and the homeownership resilience, and by that I mean your rates as far as move in, move out rates. Of course, pre-foreclosure or not getting to that point is important. It improves tenant and housing authority communication. Many of you, discuss the fact that, you don't have the sort of communication you need for folks to get certain documentation signed, acknowledgement of statements, release of information, things like that. Recertification process, can be difficult. Improving inspection and maintenance evaluation. That's a big one, right? Ongoing education assists with that. Minimizing lease agreement disputes. This is another one. And then also minimizing those pre-foreclosure and the foreclosure rates. During the pandemic, one of the biggest things that was discussed with me and a Section 184 lender was the fact that folks wouldn't communicate with their servicers. They wanted to talk to their loan officers, the people who originated their loan or, originated the conversation, but they didn't want to talk to their actual servicers. And they may not understand that your mortgage is typically sold to a servicer who provides that maintenance of your payments and whatnot, and that your loan officer isn't going to be the person they speak to anymore. So just thinking about that as an option. Education resources, as I mentioned before, OEAST is a big one in that discussion. NeighborWorks has a Native American homeownership education track. HUD Housing Counseling Network. I go there even though I don't provide HUD housing counseling myself. I primarily work in Native communities, but it does have really great resources and opportunities for you all to learn more about what's going on as an industry. So I definitely think you should take a look at what all is provided there. You can sign up for free to access their trainings and things like that. Sometimes there's a charge if you're not a HUD housing counseling agency, but you can work around that and find the free stuff. Diversified Resource Network is another great webinar platform where they provide different trainings to HUD housing counseling attendees as well as industry folks, right? So, and then many of you are familiar with the what is it? CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They have this program called Credit When Credit is Due. So those are just like a few, but there are so many that you can access. But the idea is homeownership education versus housing counseling, right? They require a different level of staff education, commitment, and skill building. So really, it's about how to advise clients depending on their their situation, and some of them can be very complex, right? So, knowing when to use one-on-one assistance versus housing education and those general classes are important. So let's break it down even further still. When you're doing a homeownership education course, you're typically removing the ready to buy or rent decision um, from that conversation. You and the clients aren't having that conversation as much. You might have a slide or two that talk about what it means to be ready to buy, but you're not having that conversation in a class with others. Um, you provide information on various mortgage products in the process, right? What's the difference between Section 184 and USDA's 502, right? You kind of can display the eligibility and the documentation requirements, but you leave it as at that. You review the purpose of home ownership, and, for example, inspections. This may be something that is done by your housing authority, that you have someone on staff who can do a home inspection. But you also talk about appraisals, insurance, and the closing process itself of buying a home. And then you detail the responsibilities of home ownership. That's a typical home buyer education training. Now, your housing counseling, it's different. You as the counselor are assisting the person that you're working with that buy and rent decision, right? You're weighing those options, and you're discussing that with them. And we'll talk a little bit about how I tend to do it using some methods through motivational interviewing. I find that works better than them feeling like I'm telling them what to do. This is a conversation that's being had. Establish a household budget. Of course, you'll do an intake and take the information necessary to assist them. You're also gathering the necessary documents, right? So you're kind of taking on the role of what the loan officer in a non-native setting would maybe do, right? The loan officer just collects the docs and helps them through the process until they get to the underwriting stage. The same is true of realtors or real estate agents, right? Typically, in a non-tribal land or trust status, right? You work with a real estate agent and they provide you with some of this information. We do it on our reservations or within our communities through housing counseling, because there are no agents for the most part in this process. And of course, you have to create your client action plan, or your work plan, or however it's described in your community, based on that individual's goal. And then you would follow up or check back in periodically to make sure that they're doing well in that regard. With one-on-one counseling, it's different. It's just a different process. You got to make sure that with the benefits of those counseling opportunities are that it allows for an in-depth analysis and relationship building that takes place. It can help with having third-party conversations, right? Because you can now speak on behalf of, with property management or with the mortgage lender or with the servicer. You can have conversations on your client's behalf. And it allows the counselor to provide an overall greater level of support, right? That's the goal of what we're doing here. But it's time consuming, right? Per client. And then also it may take a financial resource away from your organization. It might be expensive to provide. And then, because of course you want to make sure that you're sending this person to get the adequate training necessary to be effective. And then managing increased volume. Typically, if you build it, they will come, right? So the more individuals that we get into home ownership, or maybe additional resources, you've got good grant writing folks out there that are seeking out more competitive grants, right? ICDBG comes through, and all of a sudden you can provide more down payment assistance. Then what? So managing increased volume can sometimes be difficult for smaller organizations as well. Group education. I like it because I like the energy of a group. I think it's fun. But, again, it doesn't always give you the ability to follow up, right? You're just there to kind of check this particular training off a list. But with counseling, you want to make sure that you have a follow-up communication plan, in that counselors must make efforts to check in with the client at least within the first 60 days, I would say 30 days if you can. Then also attempting to communicate, modify or terminate the housing counseling, and make sure you're reporting, the follow-up itself. So, those are your basic HUD housing counseling requirements. But I think in most cases, you all have your own case management process or your policies and procedures that dictate how you connect with your staff, with your clients. Staff capacity. So, what's the difference between training skills and counseling skills? Well, what do they look like? Of course, with training skills, you want to become a subject matter expert in homeownership or in rental education, right? What does that look like? I'll kind of break that down for you in a little bit. But you learn a little bit about the things you need in order to be effective. It doesn't all happen at once, but it is something that, again, those first set of trainings that I mentioned earlier will set you up for success. And then, of course, you will have to feel comfortable with public speaking. I find that it's a skill that even now takes practice, and I've been doing it for at least 10 years. But the reality is everyone's different. Generational differences exist. And so you're constantly adapting to be able to provide effective information, the information, right? You want it to be effective. You do have to have some computer skills or have staff that can assist you with the presentation and the tech tools sorts of things. I'll show you what some of those look like at the end of the presentation here today. But you're not born with any of these things, right? You're not born a subject matter expert or learning. Maybe some are gifted in public speaking, but it can be developed. And then lastly, developing training descriptives, objectives, general marketing, and things like that are things you're going to have to hone in on. I remember going to I forget which tribe now, but I went to discuss their homeownership education opportunities, and I said, well, what do you provide the folks as far as takeaways, right? The slides have a lot of information on it, but what's something they can use to look at eligibility, right? What do I need in order to get down payment assistance? And they said, yeah, we handle our policies and procedures. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's a lot. I mean, your policies and procedures for a program, that's not really what I think. Think about it from your end. We are inundated with information every single day via email, messenger, Facebook, Instagram, social media, let alone TV and all the different ways you can access Hulu, Netflix, all those things. And then you've got websites and all the information. It's exhausting. And so when you're putting just those sorts of things out there for your community, it's going to go over their heads. The idea is you want to make sure that you think about that and take some time to look at what would be the takeaways from each training or each counseling session, and try to provide them with those one or two bullets, right? AI makes that super easy nowadays. So that's one benefit of artificial intelligence, is that you can kind of get boilerplate, like, here's just the 3 takeaways you need to have at the end of this training, or 3 takeaways I want to have by the end of this session, right? So training skills, important, but can be learned. Counseling skills, active listening skills, motivational interviewing. This is where I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that'll help to build your counseling skills. You have to have some planning for your case management, right? Making sure that you have your check-in points, but then also identifying those barriers to renting. Maybe they're in an emergency situation, in which case they need immediate housing. That's a totally different viewpoint or necessity or need. So what does that look like? Can you really talk to someone who doesn't know where they're going to lay their head at night about budgeting, or about how to prepare for tomorrow, when they've got this immediate need looming over them? Preparing materials for your renters versus your homeowner folks is important, and kind of active listening so you know exactly what they're going through and identifying with that. I'm going to give you the tools for that here in a moment. There is going to be a recording of this webinar, so it's a lot of content, I know, and we will make sure you have the webinar option, the recorded option as well. Going back to target audience, this is where, as I said before, you're going to have to decide, is it adults who lack experience or those experience housing insecurity? Is that going to be your target? How about individuals with poor rental history, poor credit history, or other issues that are considered high risk as tenants? Maybe it's young adults transitioning to become independent, live on their own. And then also increasing that homeownership readiness group, right? With the down payment assistance model. A lot of folks dangle down payment assistance as, hey, come to this training and you'll get information so you can get the down payment assistance. And so all of these groups are kind of going to the same training and they're hearing different things. And this goes back to what I was saying before about people maybe shutting down because they're not ready for the conversation yet. It's just something to think about because I think many of us see different groups come into homeownership trainings and they shouldn't necessarily be there yet. That would be my biggest takeaway for today's training is maybe we should reevaluate how we're providing the trainings so that they fit the needs and they provide some hope to those folks who are in that not yet stage, right? It's not a no, but it's a not yet. So how do we get them there? Well, the first thing is authenticity. It is key. It's not like counseling is a high level set of skills. It's the idea of doing something really well over and over again, right? So just that consistency. Perfection isn't what we want. We want you to be authentic. So you all know your communities better than anyone else. It's important that you don't feel stressed out about asking you questions about, number one, your program services. You know better than anybody else the who, what, where, and the why of it, right? You all are in your programs day in and day out. It's great when you use a consultant, but my job and how I've always come at this work is that my job is to work myself out of a job. I don't want to be a consultant that comes in, does a training and leaves. I would love it for the staff to take on these sorts of roles because they already have a connection with the community in a way that I never could, right? So it's important that you all feel comfortable. And then when you start to look at training and one-on-one counseling from this perspective, you all are more than equipped. Policies and procedures, you know what's new versus what's old. And if you don't, make sure that your staff has a place to get there, right? Because context sometimes is important. You don't know why someone did what they did or why they, what policies were they following. It's kind of good to have like a new versus old or a side-by-side of policies and procedures to give you some sort of context. So especially nowadays with folks retiring and whatnot, it's going to be really important that we are writing down, confirming, and evaluating our policies and procedures to make sure they're accurate. Of course, any sort of needs assessment, report findings, or budgets that you all develop, the information is great for grantors, for those people who are giving you all the resources, but I need the impact, right? That's what my clients need to hear. So I like to start my trainings with impact. I take videos of the previous homeowners with their permission, of course, but I want them to tell us how they succeeded, what sort of hurdles they had to endure in order to get to where they are when it comes to homeownership or even renters, right? Someone gets approved for a rental and or maybe it's a youth that is getting their first rental to experience. What does that look like for them? What was some of the things they didn't anticipate in terms of having to furnish the home, right? Saving money for things. What was it like to try to get renters insurance, things like that. And then new ideas and concepts. Of course, you're the one that's going to have to put out there. If you've got a new DPA program, you're going to have to put that information out there. And a lot of folks get scared by the idea of having to convey new ideas. But if you don't tell them, then this is how in communities you get one of those, oh, nobody told me, I didn't know, kind of conversations that, are being had outside of your organization. I would say if you've got somebody who's capable of doing some sort of marketing, or and when I say marketing, I mean it's as simple as a Facebook page, or social media, or updating your website somewhere where you can put information where people can access it, is important. Or getting some, we call them community navigators. There are some people who are so vocal in the community and can actually create positive energy by putting information out on our behalf, right? So just kind of saying, hey, can you take this flyer and post it? I really want to make sure people, and share it. These are the types of things we could be doing. Low budget, no budget sorts of outreach. And then lastly, emotional or relational material regarding prevention within your rental units, for sure. That's an area that you can do, especially now with some of the energy information that's out there. You can do some prevention stuff, helping them to save on their energy costs and things like that. Outreach, maybe even a call to action to say, hey guys, we want your input, and ask them questions about the sorts of trainings they would want to see. One real quick thing to note is that, we do have to think about our own safety, and sometimes we don't. As folks who are, nurturers and caring people who want to provide housing counseling services, we sometimes don't. We can also put ourselves in some vulnerable situations. So it's important that we have a safety policy. Some of the communities I work with, it was never even a thought. But, it is important to know that if you're going to counsel, there's some things you need to be on the lookout for. If a counselor is working after hours or at an office or an event, make sure that another staff member or community partner is present. Organizing counseling rooms so that the counselor is always closest to the door. Small little things like that maybe you might not be aware of, right? Just because of how your office is set up. Set tolerance limits. Don't allow the clients to verbally abuse you, or anyone else for that matter. I have had it happen in trainings where folks, aren't as nice to each other, and this could be something in regards to like the training management, where you have to kind of cut someone off. I know, which can be hard to do, but you don't want somebody to monopolize the conversation, right? So this goes back to making sure you have a participant code of conduct. And so for your workshops, for your events, or for your one-on-one counseling, make sure they understand that this is a give and take, and that you all want to make sure you're on the same page in the same book. The other thing, I like this idea. It's something I hadn't thought of before, but again, those HUD housing counseling agencies have this information, and I thought it would be neat to say, why not get your community safety officer, right, in your to go out and evaluate your safety policy and or your counseling environment for potential improvements. So I thought that one was a good one. And it's something we should think about, because sometimes our folks are in a vulnerable state, especially when it comes to housing insecurity. And you want to make sure that that you're protected and they're protected as well. So the other thing is confidentiality. We don't talk about it a whole lot. We just, in terms of it's already in our policies and procedures as staff. But it's really important that you're making sure that you protect their both electronic and their paper records, and the information that they provide to you. Because, for example, credit reports have a lot of information that needs to be protected, right? And that is something that we want to follow along with. Again, if at some point you were to become a HUD housing counseling agency, then these are the requirements you'd have to adhere to. So it's better to kind of put these things in place now. So that personal identifiable information, that PII, making sure that all that information is protected. And you probably already have a client management system in place, but if you don't, of course, it's required. Just make sure you're reviewing your policies and procedures to pay attention to that language, and maybe add that if you don't already have it. So some of the questions in the chat have to do with just a reminder, right? Not leaving anything that could become a weapon within reach of a client, such as the scissors or heavy paperweights. Very true. Something you just never think about. I mean, it's important that we are being conscious of that. I think, especially after the pandemic, you know, financial resiliency is the idea that you can come back from things. And we've had such a hard couple years after the pandemic that I think it's true that a lot of people are carrying things that they may not be aware of until you touch a nerve, right? Or you're in your exploring of a specific area. It may not, maybe they just finally break, and you don't want that to happen. But if it does, you want to be as, protect yourself and be as safe as you can. So I totally agree with you, Jody. And thank you for sharing. Anybody else have anything they'd like to share? Again, feel free to put it in the chat area. This is really a neat opportunity because I don't always have, what is this? 15, 20 of us in a room where we can talk about these things and be in a safe place to kind of evaluate our policies and procedures and what can change. Let's see. Garfield says, I hate change. I didn't used to, but I've changed. So I like this little cartoon because it's true. I mean, there's so much about the things we want to do, but there's so many that we want to do, right? I want to get healthier. I want to exercise more. I want to eat healthier. All those things are just related to health. But what about mental health? I want to maybe go to bed earlier. I want to make sure that I drink 8 ounces of water. What is it? 8 gallons? I don't know how many well, whatever the recommended amount of water is per day. I want to do all these things. In addition to wanting to do things for my kids, I want to be more attentive to my children. I want to make sure that we have no screen time, right? I want to start cooking at home. That's just my children in that relationship. What about my work relationships, right? I want to be more effective with my time management. I want to get to work on time. You can want change. You might need to change. You probably should change in some places. And you've been thinking about changing, but you haven't changed yet, right? So the question is, why? That can be really hard for folks to take in all at once. And so kind of giving you a background on motivational interviewing is that it is a conversation between two people in which you're kind of discussing the internal confrontations that you have within, right? The things that you want to see change in and how. But it's gentle and it's quiet. It's not something that is abrasive. I think when I first started out, definitely housing counseling felt aggressive. I'm going to make everyone a homeowner if it's the last thing I do. And it was real aggressive. And I think back at that now, considering where we are and how it's changed over time, right? Instead, I don't want to be the expert. The person I'm speaking to, my client, they're the expert. They have knowledge, experience, and inner wisdom to be able to make the changes and succeed in the goals that they have for themselves. The thing is, we're helping them identify them, right? So it's a partnership where the person identifies their own goals. It's no longer me saying, I need you to do A, B, and C. It's me saying, what would you like to work on today? Let me give you some options. We can talk about A, B, or C. What would you choose? It's giving back the control so that we're co-experts in this. We both have something to share. So let's share that. In many ways, this is going back to what you all have already known in your communities much earlier than everyone else, which is that, it's a shared experience that makes people feel comfortable and feel like the story is worth telling, and folks have the opportunity to do that in this setting. So it's the opposite of telling people what to do and how to do it. It activates discussion of change and minimizes resistance. Because anybody who's ever, had clients that are maybe defiant or anything you say, they want to say the opposite or do the opposite, it minimizes that resistance. And then the measurable skills designed to create effective interactions, right? So, when a client starts that, I had a guy in a group training the other day say, well, you never really own anything. You never really own anything because the bank owns it. You're paying on it. They could take it back. But where do I go with that, right? What do I do when there's some resistance there and I want to take it back? And I said, what you're describing, it sounds frustrating, and I know it can be or feel that way, but the system of homeownership, the way in which you can you can apply for a home loan and get approved and get in your home. That's what I'm here to describe, and explain to you what your options are, right? But I agree with you in that, it is much more complicated. That is a bigger topic than we have time to discuss, as far as, whether you truly ever own anything. The spirit of motivational interviewing has to have a pace to it. And so it's just an acronym that says partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation. What does that mean? I'll explain it here now. So first, it's a respect for each other. I totally respected that individual and his opinion. I think it was as existential. Like I don't have enough hours in the day to ponder it necessarily, because I do have some objectives I have to meet in the time that I have. But I hopefully I gave him enough respect so that he could understand that we both have experience to give, we both have expertise to give, and I can only stay in my lane and give the sort of expertise necessary for you to feel comfortable in the homeownership process if you choose to move forward with it. And so it's a dance rather than wrestling. I wasn't going to argue with him about it. I don't think that gets us anywhere. And if anything, it creates a super awkward vibe in the room, right? So I accepted the fact that, we are both inherently worth the energy to talk about homeownership or about whatever the conversation is, and the potential that's there. It's kind of being upbeat about it. I think that sometimes as homeownership professionals, it can be pretty time consuming, right? We've got so much on our plate. We've got so many things going on that we don't always sound too enthusiastic about what we're going to do. And I think we have to learn to get there. So we empathize with folks. We understand where they're coming from. We support this being their decision, right? Giving them that autonomy. And then, of course, affirming their strengths. What do I mean by that? There's always going to be folks in the room that are going to be the savers and the spenders, valuing them both, right? Explaining that, each one can take on a role in the process of homeownership or of preparing for a rental application, and have an important thing to contribute. Compassion, we're not fixing a problem. That's kind of the old way of looking at it. Instead, I'm giving priority to immediate needs. So the client will tell me what their needs are, and we'll discuss what they think their priorities should be. Before I get into the ORS method, the last one is evocation. We talk about knowledge, wisdom, things that they've learned, things they're proud of. We build that so that we have, as a relationship, the person and I, the client and I, have a strength that we can then talk about some things that maybe are negative, right? Or that let's talk about the credit history that they're not so excited to discuss with us today, right? And then motivation, right? This is where you're building their strength to motivate them to do things that need to be done. So going back to the ORS method, you want your questions to be open, right? So this is another acronym. Remember what an oar does? It moves the boat to and from their destination. Hopefully it's getting you where you need to go. So the first thing you need to do is ask an open question. I don't want to know when you're doing intake, what is your date of birth? Do you smoke? How long have you been, has this been going on? How long when were you evicted? Those are very closed questions. Very, not to say you don't need to ask them in order to get your intake done, but try to create a mix. What brings you here today? Tell me more about what was it like for you when, if you were to change, what would be your reasons, right? What are some of your goals? What would you like to do next? Just giving someone the ability to decide what to do next. And I did a training the other day, and someone said, well, this all sounds like I'm being like going to a counselor for like behavioral cognitive therapy, like an actual therapy session. And so I would say that it does allow for you to sometimes get more information than you maybe wanted. But if a person feels comfortable with you, your job again is to be an or, to steer them back to the conversation of whatever you're trying to accomplish in the home ownership setting. I mean, I just want to say that because it does sound like some of these questions are very open-ended and maybe too open, but I think that's the kind of relationship you want with someone in terms of getting them comfortable with the idea of change. Otherwise, what are we really doing? There's nothing worse than putting someone in a homeownership situation and they're not ready, or a rental, and then we find out three months later they were kicked out, right? So or when they could have come to you if they had maybe a stronger relationship. So the other element to ORs is affirmations, positive. Be the positive person. Sometimes they're not around people that are very positive, or they're kicking themselves already for having messed their credit up, right? So you are a very courageous person. You showed a lot of patience when you handled that situation. Here's what I've noticed about your changes lately, or the things that you're discussing lately. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. Just acknowledging the fact that, of all the things we could be doing today, you're here. That's a big one. Avoiding starting the conversation with I. Center it around the other person. Make them feel comfortable. The R in ORs is reflective listening. What do I mean by that? It's good listening skills, making sure that you're kind of reiterating, is this what I heard, right? So let's go into the example. I don't know about moving to that neighborhood. Why? You're not sure. What are you not sure about? Like, just asking a follow-up question to make sure we're all on the same page. Here's another one. I don't know about moving to that neighborhood. So you have some concerns about moving there, like, is it that your family might not fit in, that your kids might not like going to that school? What is it exactly that, because sometimes they provide you with closed statements and it's really hard to know where to move forward. And the last thing is summarizing, kind of backing up reflective listening. It's saying, let me make sure I understand what you've said. If they're feeling both ways, then name both ways, right? So you're feeling anxious about moving, but you feel like you don't have any options, but then the options that you do have, you don't like because XYZ. Let's talk about those. Change, highlighting change talk. I'm going to talk about change here in a minute. But you want to highlight change talk, and I'll explain to you what that is. And end with another invitation. So here's how change talk works, right? Any client speech that it points in favor of the movement, right? Wherever we want them to go, or we think that it'd be helpful for them to go, whatever that goal is, if they mention it, we highlight it. And it's funny because there's this another acronym. So far, I've given you PACE, Partnership, Acceptance, Compassion, and Evocation, and ORS. Open questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summaries, right? So my third and final, I swear this is the final one, is darn cat. So when you hear change, a desire to change, I want to, I would like to, I wish to, I hope to, could sound like that. Ability, I can, I could, I am able to. If there are reasons, like it would help me if, or I'd be better off if there are needs, I need to, I have to, something has changed, right? You want to highlight, stop the conversation and address it, because those are change talk thoughts that are coming through. We want to praise those opportunities for them, that they are going to maybe do something that would benefit their goal that they have. So we kind of connect the two so they can kind of see this particular type of communication is better for you and accomplishing the goal you've already set, right? The same is true with CAT. It's commitment. I will, I promise, I give you my word. Activation. I'm willing to, I'm ready to, I'm prepared to, and then taking action steps. So I put in an application, I opened my bills, I cleaned my apartment, the things that have moved them towards positive change, highlight that. So how do you evoke change talk? See, again, this is them having a conversation with themselves, essentially. So you can ask questions like, what worries you about your current situation? What would you want to make this change? Or, excuse me, why would you want to make this change? How might you go about it in order to succeed? Looking back, what were things like for you before your eviction, right? Or before your divorce, or things that have affected housing, right? So if you're asking that, it's because maybe the divorce ruined their finances, right? So just, it's not counseling by way of therapy. It's counseling by way of opening those questions up so that they can come to better solutions for themselves. And the thing about it is this, again, this isn't something you're born with. It will take practice. I'm going to give you a tool, a little reminder card at the end. That's how you can remember some of these, because it's a lot. Looking forward, how would you like to be different by a certain time, right? So, just insert the time that you think it's going to take 6 months to clean up your credit. How would you like your credit? What score would you like to see your credit be 6 months from now? And then what would it take for us to get there, right? Explore goals and values to determine what's important in life. And so a guided motivational interview and conversation, there are some things you want to avoid, right? You're not persuading them to move in any one direction. You're not assuming that you're in charge and that this is what you, again, going back to who's responsible for what. You're responsible to advise them of their options. And if they know that ahead of time, then they don't feel like you're trying to be, superior to them. I've left sessions with folks where maybe they're giving me some sort of advising, and I just feel like, they don't get me, right? You don't want that. Criticizing, shaming, and blaming can sometimes take place, and it might be a bias that you're not familiar with, right? Or you just assume they chose to spend their money on or blow their income tax time, right? So it could be that they blew their income tax, and we had a whole discussion on how we were going to spend that, right? But this isn't about criticizing, shaming, or blaming them. It's circling back and saying, okay, we made some mistakes here regarding how we wanted to apply things. So let's go back to the beginning and kind of reevaluate what would make more sense, right? Because sometimes it's that they want to change so badly, they're willing to say things that aren't true. And the reality is, I'm not going to use all my income tax or put all my income tax money into savings. If you could start there and ask the question, does that seem realistic to you? If the answer is yes, ask them why. Why do they think that that's realistic? What steps would they take so that it can be realistic, and move it into an open space? Labeling, of course, unhospitable, you never want that. And then paternalistic, just kind of acting like, let's go over your chart and see what you did this week, and see whether or not you did all the things you said you were going to do. I mean, that's kind of how it was in the past, and we're moving away from that. When you're responding to discord, right? Again, someone's not necessarily agreeing with what you have to say. It's about permission. So once they're done, you can say, do I have your permission to discuss this with you? I want to make sure you understand where I'm coming from. And that totally disarms the situation. People tend to just say, wait a minute, I just told you how it was going to be, and now you're asking for my permission. So I think that's a great way of kind of saying, let's go back so that we can be on the same page in the same book. I heard what you said, and here's how. And I affirm what was said, right? I shift the focus by saying, whether or not we disagree, here's where we are today. Here's what, we'll need in order to move forward with your application. I need the following. Let's discuss. Do I have your permission for us to discuss how we can get the documents that we need, right? Emphasizing personal voice and control. Again, putting them back in control. So, permission talk, these are some of the things that you can use. Do you mind if we talk about? I see or heard. I'm wondering if you'd be open to discussing. So there are tons of them there. I'll just leave those there for you. Affirmations. For example, you showed a lot of strength in asking in following your guest policy, right? And making sure that, like, if you had a family member or friend that you knew couldn't be in the apartment, what would you do, right? Kind of showing, and then being positive about what they would have done. Reinforcing self-confidence. That's what this is about. You'd be surprised what people are saying about themselves. It's usually never positive. And so if you can do that and be that person for them, they will value the time that they spend with you. So balancing decisions, this is how you can do that. Those are the questions there on that front. But all of this can be found in the evidence-based toolkit that talks about why motivational interviewing works and how it can help. And I also provided you with those resources there. Real quick, I'm going to bring out the reminder card. Oh, okay. Hopefully everybody can see this. But it says, am I doing this right? I mean, how do I know? Remind me. Here's a card that gives you, do I listen more than I talk? Do I keep myself sensitive and open to a person's issues, whatever they may be, right? So it gives you kind of a checklist. Do I summarize for this person what I'm hearing? And just gives you a great little tool to tack up on your desk and use to kind of evaluate how you provide counseling, because sometimes we don't always see it. We're too close to the program itself to evaluate how we can improve, right? So with that, I just share that with you. Couple other things while I'm in resource mode. I'm going to share my screen, Awista, if that's okay. And actually, I don't want to share my screen. I want to share that. We're going to talk a little bit about the tools that we use. And I thought this was funny. So going back to Darn Cat, I thought it'd be neat to show this video.
Can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
The clip is giving the world a much-needed laugh.
The courtroom sketch artist was like, didn't think I'd be drawing whiskers today, but
it happened during
all right. So hopefully,
lawyer who didn't realize.
Hopefully everybody remembers that from 2020. It was a guy who had his Zoom somehow, maybe it was a grandchild or a child that was using their Zoom for class, but he had a filter on and it turned him into a cat. Does everybody remember that, or is that just me? I just think it's super funny. In any case, it's your 3 o'clock pickup. So it's 3 o'clock here on the East Coast. So if you haven't used or seen that video, go to YouTube, and I'll provide you with the link here in a minute. You've never seen it? So it was the 394th Circuit. The guy goes on there, as he's a lawyer. He goes on there to represent his client. The point is, don't take it too serious with training. I think that a lot of times we get so wound up on, making sure we have all the materials and whatnot, that we can sometimes take ourselves too serious. I do want you to be more comfortable with training. I think that it can be helpful, but I don't want you to take it too seriously. So, and I like to show that video sometimes in class. It gets people just laughing, but it's super funny. How often should we train? What should we train on? We're going to talk about that for a little bit in the last 20 minutes that we've got. So with first-time renters, you could do quarterly or twice a year, once a month, however much energy and capacity you have. One moment. Talking about training and adjusting, I have to put my laptop to charge. Okay. Maybe your first-time renters have little or no credit history, no leasing experience, no established housing financial skills, no housing maintenance experience, right? Mom and dad have always been doing it for it, or grandma has always been doing it for them. Avoiding renter scam. These are all the types of things that you could provide to your renters. Current renters, you might want to talk to them separate, right? Going back to how to engage clients, future, former, current. Let's talk about current renters. Monthly training opportunities. Right now, oh gosh, the name is gonna, there's a CDFI that provides credit counseling services. So maybe you don't provide it, but there are other organizations that can. And so reminding them of the fact that they can use those services. Um, little or no credit history, rental payment reminders, preventative maintenance support, crisis budgeting, right? Home ownership screening. We're about to go into income tax time, or you might already have a VETA program, but maybe there's someone who can talk about savings, knowing that this lump sum of money might be coming in. So to develop that content, you kind of always work backwards in saying, okay, well, what do I need them to know in regards to my policies and procedures? I don't hand them the actual policies and procedures. I might need them to sign it, yes. So when I have my one-on-one counseling session, that's what that's for. But I want to just have a run through of the tenant and the TDHE rights and responsibilities. And the same is true of homeowners. I might want to have a breakdown of the types of rental units and the homeownership opportunities that exist. But again, not straight from the policies and procedures. I literally put in the AI, I'll put in the information, and then I'll put, maybe 10th grade reading level, maybe 7th grade reading level. And here's why. It's important that we make sure that we're giving them the information in consumable bites. And it may be hard. For some folks, they're not linear type A learners, right? They maybe need it to consume in smaller bites. So just something to think about. I think, again, we're really close to the fire. We're really close to this information every day. For folks who don't think about rental education, who don't think about the types of things you'll hear about in a homeownership class, then this stuff is going to go over their head. So the other thing is create some videos on how to complete the rental application, how to establish or improve credit scores. I see Charmaine in the room there. She actually used to work for, I think it was Experian. So shout out to you and your background. But yeah, why not make a video? That would be a neat way of kind of putting that information out there for folks. So that plain language is important. I think that it helps. Rental homeownership training ideas could be working with your guest speakers. So I break down the guest speaker opportunity, housing counselors, elder services, health and human services. Your elder services group, they might need a whole different set of information in regards to being on a fixed income, right? Managing a budget on a fixed income. That could be its own training with a smaller group. I say to think about your sizes of your groups so that you don't lose anyone along the way. I have had it happen where we've got groups with folks that are online banking and using those tools, and I totally lose the group that's still brick and mortar going to a place to bank, right? So just think about that if you have the capacity to do it. IHS, if there's any sort of housing with wraparound services, making sure that all those folks are in the room. Takes some coordination. It's not easy, but it can be done. Reviewing a sample lease, preventative maintenance, again, safe, sound, sanitary. What does that mean? What does that mean to your tenants? Tribal maintenance, maybe if there's someone there that can speak, or a property manager or an inspector could come on and talk to them about ways that they can protect their apartment from, unsafe or sanitary things, just simple things too, like changing their air filter. Effective communication, right? This is where it helps, because oftentimes, the tenants have questions that they don't want to ask the office. But, if you have someone that's a great communicator, then talking to them about ways to communicate information, it's just helpful when you have that sort of training for your folks. How to be a good neighbor. What does that look like? How to be a savvy consumer, right? Nowadays, influencers, Instagram, there's so many ways we're being asked to spend $1. How many people are maybe paying for things in apps, and we don't realize what we're spending our money on, especially now that everything is pretty much put on a card. Set it and forget it. You don't even know you're being charged monthly for things. So try to break those things down into smaller bites. use that plain language to let them know that you've got a training for those individual things, and you'd be happy to kind of come out and do that for the community. The typical home buying agenda has these sorts of things: money management, spending and savings, banks, credit union discussions. Of course, if you have a CDFI, they can come on and talk to folks, credit report and repair, types of loans and eligibility. But specific to your communities, many of you are on tribal trust, so that land management process, the application process, having folks talk about that. And here's going back to what I was saying before. The first time I had a land management person come on, she went through her program, and I had assumed that she had already been through the homeownership process. And when we were done, she came on and she said, "Oh, I think this is so great. I'm so thankful. Hopefully one day I too can be a homeowner." And it just dawned on me that sometimes there's folks that are very close to the process that they themselves haven't gone through it. So it's important that we're bringing this information, we're putting it out there for folks, and hopefully I'll see her in our next training. But yeah, it's some of us work really closely to home ownership or education or some of these resources in tribal communities, and we ourselves don't have everything we need. So you can even do employee-based trainings for folks, and that could be another service that's being provided, right? Just wanted to throw that out there. But utilities, IHS, because typically if you're needing to have that infrastructure put in for for water and waste, then IHS has some money for that in the homeownership space. So how do you handle capacity development, right? Getting your trainers, first they have to understand adult learners and how this particular part of it works, right? Learning activities are super important. Hand-on activities are important. Lecturing's great, but it doesn't cover everything, right? If you just lecture, if you just go with the books, they almost always only get a percentage of that, right? So you want to make sure that you break it up. Even in this particular training, I put that cat video in there for a reason, kind of break up the sound of my voice a little bit and give you an opportunity to experience something different. When I took out the slide to show you that there is a checklist or a tool, is to give your eyes a break, right? So just being thoughtful when it comes to adult learners. Yeah, I can definitely get you some good trainings for inspections, what to look for, normal wear and tear. What does that mean versus, things that would require a handyman versus a general contractor, right? So these are the sorts of skills that are good for folks to have. And I have some training options for you there, Bernadette. I can put that in the chat when we're through. Sure. So in regards to training development, the other thing is time and location. Time is critical. Busy work schedules, family responsibilities, think about it in terms of seasons. You've got, football, basketball, powwow, all the different ways in which people are torn in different directions. So just be mindful of that. And of course, those virtual Zoom options versus on-site, what will matter most is what's most convenient for your clients. And I give you some options here. So like, for example, if you wanted to do one on leases, here's some content development, right? Just all you got to do is copy and paste this stuff, and then you can make some slides based on that. Same is true of preventative maintenance. So these last set of slides, in case you want to share it with staff, is just for you to be able to use it and turn it into your own stuff. Inspections, as someone mentioned, here's a good list. Renters' rights, right? Talk to them about going back to giving them some of the strengths to know what they should know about fair housing, habitable dwelling, proper notice of eviction, timely communication, notice of entry, security deposit, the definitions, the things that they should be aware of as renters. Avoiding conflict, right? That's another one. What does it mean, right of entry? Collecting rent and late fees, responsibility of repairs, security deposit. Those are the kinds of things, content development that you can create. These could be posts, right? Each one of these could be a post on Facebook or Instagram. Planning strategy, time and location we talked about. So this is one of the groups that I worked with, Cheyenne River Housing Authority. We talked about what their communication love languages were from the beginning. I want to know, do you prefer written communication, social media, and text? I will tell you that I may have a hard time getting a hold of folks with written communication or email, but you send them a text, they text you right back, right? So it could land on a generational thing, but I think that with the pandemic, we are moving towards that being the case, where that's where they're getting the body of their information from. And also, you're kind of going against all of that, right? They get so much information from the internet, from Facebook, from Instagram, that it may not be accurate. That's the other thing. I had a guy that was confused with all the down payment assistance options that were out there, because there was so much he was taking in from other places and spaces that he was incorrect. And so I kind of had to break that down for him, because not every program will work well with others, right? Or it might change your contribution efforts, how much they can contribute, or how much of that has to be the buyer. So just thinking about the communication love language. This is a tool that I use when I'm looking at planning, is that if I have an hour and a half, what would be my objectives? What would be the topics? What activities or learning methods would I need to use, and what materials? So this breaks it down really good. It's easy, something you can use to break down what you need to say and the time you need to say it, right? In our conversation, I've always watched the clock. It's 3:21. So I want to make sure that in the next 9 minutes, I go over what we have left, 8 minutes, that we have left. Lender outreach events or any sort of partner in the industry events, these are important to have as well. Sometimes you can invite them. You don't have to be the only voice, and that helps. Homebuyer groups, if you don't have a Facebook page already, you can create one, and that way you kind of have like a cohort of folks that are coming together, and you can put things in there like saving for repairs, debt reduction, wills, and estate planning. I'm so thankful that we're at a point in Native homeownership where we can talk about this, because I feel like, in the beginning, it was just about making homeowners, and now we can talk about how to protect the investment, right? The folks need to understand will and estate planning in order to protect that generational wealth that exists in a home, right? So just being mindful of that, because we talk about it, but then they don't necessarily get that next step. Also, sometimes it can cost money to generate the will itself, or plan. And so folks have to understand that, what those costs look like. Insurance industry updates, as we get fires and floods and other things become more expensive. So when to file a claim, right? That's a training in and of itself for our existing homeowners, right? So here are some slides just to kind of tell you or show you how I break out the existing trainings, right? So for example, OESTA has Building Native Communities. We're all familiar with that. And if you're not, go ahead and sign up for the next one. It's an amazing training. They have something called What's Your Money Culture, right? Where we talk about how their family discusses money, or if their family discussed money. And I break, and that gives everybody a chance to kind of lay the same foundation as to what we know about money. But then I take my my OESTA stuff and I add my motivational interviewing with it, right? Or I say, okay, now let's talk about money statements. What does it look like? If I say I want to attend college, own a car, and have my own place to live, a person may hear, I dream of attending an out-of-state college, owning my own, a nice car, having my own apartment without needing a roommate. Positive money statement. To do this, I need to manage my finances wisely, make smart investments in myself, attend a good college, maybe not out of state, but buy a reliable car and have a comfortable living space. So I have them reevaluate their money statements based on what we started with, which is their money culture. So just going back to how you have to tailor it to fit your community and your need, developing a budget. I might talk about math anxiety first, right? Because some of us, if you've ever been at the table with mom and dad and they're yelling at you because you didn't get the answer right, I mean, some of us see numbers and totally shut down, right? So maybe we have that conversation before we jump into that, or, before I start getting into the heavier stuff, we talk about it. This is a cute couple. He was a veteran, and they were in my Native American direct loan class. It was the first time Cheyenne River Housing Authority had ever put on a Native veteran training for them specifically. And I thought it was super neat that we had such a great mix of veterans, both in all the different generations present. But we only got there because of a needs assessment. So I wanted to bring that up. Amongst the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe veterans surveyed, only 75% responded an interest in purchasing a home, but had no understanding of the VA home loan program, and 84% were not aware of the Native American direct loan, which is available to veterans on tribal trust land. Can I tell you right now, interest rates are a little under 7%. The Native American direct loan is 2.5%. That is the current interest rate for the next year and a half or so. So if this is the case in this particular community, I would venture to say that many of our veterans are not familiar with the Native American direct loan, and that it can be used on tribal trust land. The VA office has had to do a lot to repair the relationship. There's been some changes that have been made to the offices and the way, because it's not like Section 184 where you have lenders administer the program on your behalf. The VA is the lender in the case of NADL. So Native American veterans wanting to use or purchase a home on tribal trust land have to go through the VA, and so we've had to kind of fight them to make sure that they're doing what is necessary and making the program more accessible. So just want to throw that out there. So some of the other things, in addition to citing your references, because you should, as I said before, I use AWISTA stuff. I make sure that they acknowledge the body of work that they've done. We actually came up with what's called the best practices. We had some funders that came through, and they actually helped me with creating a best practice for other communities. This was their needs assessment, as I mentioned. And we evaluated technology needs, policy compliance, right? Like, okay, if we're going to have a virtual training, does everybody need to have their camera on? What does it need to look like, et cetera? So I encourage you to take a look at that. It might be helpful. And then this veteran in particular said, Ten Hut, we salute you. Your 12-week program provided us with guidance and tools, gives us hope and preparation, sustaining us to the point of setting a first-class goal. As a trainer, it doesn't get better than that, right? I think that what it took to get there was preparation, capacity building, right? Because it wasn't just myself, but the staff. We were preparing the staff for the new training that would take place. It's getting our referral partners, right? In this case, the coordinators of the NADL from VA office to participate. We had invited them on to speak 4 separate times. It takes design and pre and post training checklists. That can be one way of kind of managing it all. Of course, you have to have roles and responsibilities for your facilitators. I like it when I have 2 people on to speak. It breaks up, again, the one voice, and it allows for folks to communicate more effectively, I think. The other thing is there are a lot of online tools. So, for example, we used, this is Google Slides. But we also used just their home sales information, right? So Cheyenne River Housing Authority has a community development where they are building the homes. They had IHS put in the city sewer and water, county sewer and water, or tap into that. So it's a cost savings to the members because then they only have to pay for the home itself. And so those were the costs, and they had never really thought to break that part out, but it makes a really great visual, right? As far as the amount of the home. That is Sharon Vogel, the executive director of their housing authority. So we, as far as plans and hope, it was really great to be able to have her come on and speak about what the housing authority is doing to increase housing and home ownership. This is USDA that came on to speak. This is IHS to talk about the waste and water sewer process. If you're buying a house on tribal trust land, but maybe using your own home site, then they needed to know about it. And then lastly, I love this homeownership map because when we were done with class, I asked folks to just kind of map it out for me. What did they use, or what did they take away from the class, and how would they use it? And I had a client actually create an actual map, which I thought was cool. So it was just neat that someone took the time to be more creative. In the last minute or so, I just want to talk about my workspace. I always have my mom and my grandma next to me, so they're there right there next to me while I'm doing my training. I always have some sort of gift of gratitude from the staff or the folks that I've worked with in the past, because I think, again, going back to negative language and how we talk about ourselves and think about the work that we do, sometimes we get hung up on the feedback. And so I always have the gifts of gratitude to remind myself that I'm okay. I'm doing all right. Sticky notes with answers. You don't always have the answers to everything. You do your best you can. Got to sustain yourself. Make sure you drink lots of water, and, I have a snack there. And then I wanted to tell you about my bottle cap or paper clip. I am not, I do like to do what I do for a living, but public speaking can bring out my anxiety a little bit. So I have a bottle cap that I usually use, or a paper clip. I don't like paper clips that much because they break up, but I press on them while I'm talking. And typically that takes the energy away from like the nervous energy, and it kind of like channels it, right? So I hold on to a bottle cap, and obviously I can't do that when I'm on site. I put it in my pocket. And so people sometimes don't notice that my right hand has the clicker and my left hand has a bottle cap. But it's usually from a water bottle or something like that. But it helps me kind of just channel some of that nervous energy. Training design tools. I like Jamboard, which is a neat free Google tool. I also like, as you can see here, it helps you to break up all the different trainings and give them different ways to have the group you're working with tell the story instead of you. And then also too, I love this when it's an online tool called Mentimeter, and basically it allows folks to come to a site where they can in real time see people answering the questions. Google Forms is another great way of collecting information. So if you have surveys and things like that. Kahoot is another one, just a fun little tool. This one kind of gamifies things so that, let's say you want to talk to them about, budgeting, and you want to make sure they got all the answers. What's fixed, flexible, and luxury? Then, you could put that in a question, and it would give them options. Keep a running list of all your presentation materials and your videos, any links that you want to provide or QR codes. And then I'm not advocating for or against it, because I know some people are anti AI or artificial intelligence, but when you're doing trainings, sometimes it can be your best friend because you can really condense information down to a few sentences or bullets. So with that, I just want to say thank you for chatting with me for an hour and a half there. I've got some information in the web links area for you to take hold of, as well as files for you to download. But I do appreciate you all being here and sharing our knowledge when it comes to home ownership counseling or housing education counseling. Hopefully I can see more rental counseling happening in the future. I think that's what we really need for our folks. To prepare them for home ownership, we should start at the rental stage. So thank you and have a great day. Oh, sorry, Awista, one more thing. I just wanted to put this out there. For those of you who have the time, I do realize you might have to go back to work, but I just wanted to let you know, Collective Abundance Fund is a grant awarded to Indian Collective, and it just opened up grants of $25,000 and $50,000 to support home ownership. You can do other things with it, but it can also be for down payment assistance on a home. And the idea is that it will help us rebuild Indigenous wealth. So I wanted to make sure I let everyone know that that's open. There is an application process. You register first and then you can apply afterwards. So the link is there in the chat. But that's for my friends and family in Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota.
Wonderful job, Marie. As always, your webinars are incredible. I went ahead and already launched the webinar feedback. The feedback greatly helps Marie. It just lets her know what you guys would like to see in future webinars, anything you would like her to touch up on, or if you have any questions, please feel free to email her yourself. Marie is absolutely wonderful and will certainly take the time to answer any questions you have. Our next webinar is going to be March 7th. It is Performance Management Smart Goals presented by Lisa Perez. As always, registration is free, so please do not forget to register. We will start that webinar at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 10 a.m. Alaska. And of course, like Marie mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded just like all of our other ones, and you can find that on our website at www.nativelearningcenter.com under the Kathita Recorded Webinar tab. It will be uploaded by 9 a.m. tomorrow. If you have any questions opening this webinar recording or any other webinar recording, please let me know and I'd be more than happy to help you. Please don't forget to check out our upcoming events on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And of course, we have our podcast called Hope a Thing, a Native American Podcast, and you can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Simplecast. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it, and I hope everyone was able to find something from today's webinar that resonates with them. Thank you, Marie, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.